The sheriff arrested an FBI assistant director at breakfast. The town of Calder Bend sat where two county roads crossed and never went anywhere else. One traffic light blinked yellow all night above the courthouse square. The Wagon Wheel Diner opened before the sun did, and it had for 40 years. Vivian Marsh arrived a little after 5 in the morning, driving a rented sedan with plates from 3 states away. She wore a plain gray jacket, jeans, and boots that had seen real ground. Nothing about her suggested rank, and that was the point. Vivian was an assistant director assigned to the FBI's Civil Rights Oversight Division, a position she had held for 11 months. She had built her career the slow way, working detention oversight cases in 4 regions before Washington ever knew her name. For 6 weeks, her office had been receiving letters from Larkspur County. The letters were unsigned, inconsistent in handwriting, and mailed from 3 different towns to avoid a pattern. They described people held overnight without charges, cash that vanished from evidence lockers, and complaints that always came back marked unfounded. Every complaint had been reviewed by the same supervisor, and every complaint had been closed within 48 hours. That kind of consistency was its own kind of evidence. Vivian's office could have called ahead. She chose not to. A department that expects visitors will always perform for them. She wanted to see Calder Bend on an ordinary Tuesday, not on its best behavior. She parked near the corner and walked the last block on foot, taking in the courthouse, the hardware store with its faded awning and a community board layered with lost dog flyers and church bake sale notices. Inside the diner, she chose a booth near the window, one that gave her a clear view of the door and the parking lot. She ordered coffee and eggs from a waitress named Diane, who moved fast and spoke little. While she waited, Vivian opened a plain notebook and wrote down small things, which trucks were parked outside, which regulars nodded to each other without speaking. How the room went quiet for 3 full seconds when a patrol car rolled past the window. A rancher near the counter lowered his voice mid-sentence and didn't finish it. An older man by the register looked at the door before he looked at his coffee. Fear has a rhythm, and Vivian had learned to hear it. At 6:40, the door opened, and Sheriff Dale Rourke walked in. He was broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, and known by every person in the room. Rourke had run Larkspur County for 19 years, and in that time he had become something more than an elected official. He was praised at town council meetings for keeping crime numbers low. His photograph hung in the hardware store next to a ribbon cutting from 3 years back. People believed he kept them safe, and mostly they wanted to keep believing it. Rourke's real talent was reading a room, and this morning, the room had someone in it he didn't recognize. He noticed the out-of-state plates through the window before he noticed Vivian herself. Then he noticed the notebook. Sheriff Rourke didn't sit at his usual table. He walked directly to Vivian's booth, rested one hand on the back of the seat across from her, and said, "Don't believe I've seen you around." "Passing through," Vivian said, and kept writing. "Passing through to where?" "That's not really a question I owe an answer to." Rourke's jaw shifted slightly, the way it did when a suspect answered wrong in an interview room. "I run this county," he said. "I like to know who's in it." "I understand that," Vivian said, calm and even. "Am I suspected of a crime?" He didn't answer that directly. Instead, he asked for identification. "Is there a legal basis for that request?" she asked. "There's me asking," he said. "That's not the same thing," she said. "Am I being detained, Sheriff?" The word sheriff landed strangely since she'd read it off his name tag rather than asked for it, and he noticed that too. Deputy Ellis Boone stood near the counter, 26 years old, 3 years on the job, and close enough to hear all of it. Ellis had grown up watching Rourke coach his Little League team, and had never once seen anyone talk to the sheriff this way. He also knew, in the part of his training that had nothing to do with loyalty, that the sheriff had no cause here, no crime reported, no complaint filed. A woman sitting quietly with a notebook and a cup of coffee. Ellis took one step forward, opened his mouth, and then didn't finish either the step or the sentence. Rourke asked where she was staying, who she worked for, what was in her bag, and whether he could look through her notebook. Vivian answered only what the law required her to answer, which was very little. "I haven't broken a law and I haven't consented to a search," she said. "If you believe otherwise, you're welcome to state the specific charge." The diner had gone fully silent by then. Diane stood frozen near the coffee machine. The rancher stared at his plate. An older woman near the door quietly lifted her phone and began recording, holding it low against her chest like she didn't want to be seen doing it. Rourke's frustration wasn't about the law anymore. It was about the fact that, for the first time in a long time, someone in his county wasn't afraid of him. "Stand up," he said. "You're coming with me." "On what charge?" "Obstruction. Failure to identify. We'll sort the paperwork later." "You have not identified any lawful basis to detain me or compel identification," Vivian said, still seated, still calm. "You have a stranger with a notebook and no specific crime." He pulled her up by the arm anyway, turned her and cuffed her in front of the window, in front of Diane, in front of the rancher, in front of Ellis, who still hadn't moved. Vivian did not resist. She did not raise her voice. She let it happen, because she understood something Rourke didn't yet. If she told him who she was in that moment, the county would learn nothing true about itself. He would apologize, release her, quietly warn his staff, and Calder Bend would go back to looking peaceful from the outside. She wasn't willing to let that happen twice. Rourke walked her out to his cruiser in full view of Main Street, the arrest becoming, for him, a kind of demonstration. 3 people filmed it on their phones. None of them said a word out loud. At 7:20, while Rourke was still filling out an incident report at his desk, 3 unmarked SUVs pulled onto Main Street. Vivian's scheduled check-in had been missed by 11 minutes, triggering a standard protective protocol tied to the field visit. Her phone's last known location was the Wagon Wheel Diner. A small regional team had already been positioned 30 minutes away because the visit involved repeated allegations of unlawful detention and missing evidence. A senior special agent named Rosa Calderon stepped out first, followed by 2 other agents and a legal advisor. It was not a raid, just 5 people, 2 badges visible, walking calmly toward the sheriff's office. Rourke came out to meet them, already assuming they were there in some supporting role, maybe federal grant auditors, maybe marshals passing through. "We're looking for Assistant Director Marsh," Calderon said. "She missed a scheduled contact window." Rourke's expression changed slowly, the way ice changes before it cracks. He led them inside, past the booking desk, to the holding area, where Vivian sat in a metal chair, still cuffed, notebook confiscated and sitting in a plastic tray on the counter. "Ma'am," Calderon said, "are you all right?" "I'm fine," Vivian said. "Uncuff me, please, and let's begin documenting." Rourke stood in the doorway, understanding arriving in pieces. The body cam on his own chest was still recording. The diner's camera above the register had captured the arrest from a second angle. His own deputy had watched the entire thing happen. There was no version of this he could explain his way out of. Calderon's first instructions weren't about Rourke at all. They were about evidence. "I want the sheriff's body cam and the deputy's body cam preserved immediately," she said. "Diner surveillance, dispatch logs, booking records, the sheriff's office computers, and the evidence room ledgers. Nothing gets touched, deleted, or reformatted starting now." A legal advisor began drafting preservation orders on a laptop at the booking counter, while a federal evidence technician sealed the department's server room with tape and a signature log. Vivian didn't raise her voice at Rourke, didn't lecture him, didn't perform anger for the room. She simply said, "This starts with facts, Sheriff, not apologies." Within the hour, preservation orders were in place and the county attorney's office had been notified. The first search warrants followed later that day as affidavits established probable cause, with additional warrants issued over the next several days. Rourke was placed on administrative leave by that evening, not by Vivian's authority, but by the county commission, moving fast to distance itself once footage began circulating. The deeper investigation started small. A records clerk, going through complaint files for the federal team, found a drawer that wasn't in the department's official index. Inside were 41 complaints going back 9 years. Most carried the same classification language, and nearly all had been signed off by Rourke himself. Cross-referencing bank deposits against the evidence room's seized cash log revealed a gap of just over $200,000 across 6 years. Cash logged as evidence that never reached the county treasury. An old auction ledger, handwritten and kept outside the official county system, showed 3 trucks and a horse trailer sold to a buyer, sharing a last name with Rourke's brother-in-law. None of it was proven yet. All of it needed paperwork, custody chains, and testimony. But it was no longer a rumor. Deputy Ellis Boone was interviewed on the second day. He answered questions carefully at first, protecting details out of habit more than loyalty, until Calderon asked him directly whether he'd witnessed probable cause before the arrest. No, he finally said. There wasn't any. Once he said it out loud, more came. He knew where an old server had been moved when the department upgraded its recording system 2 years earlier. He remembered a specific interrogation he'd been told to leave the room for. He remembered a name. That name belonged to Malik Denny, a 23-year-old traveling mechanic who had been pulled over on Route 9 4 years earlier, held overnight without charges, and pressured into signing a confession for a theft that was never actually reported by any victim. Malik had lost his job over that arrest, and though the charges were quietly dropped weeks later, no record of the dismissal ever made it into the county's public files. He had spent 4 years believing he'd simply been unlucky. The old server Ellis remembered was found in a storage closet behind the evidence room, unplugged and half forgotten. On it, federal technicians recovered raw interrogation footage that had never made it into Malik's file, including a portion where Rourke could clearly be heard telling him what to write. That single recording reopened Malik's case and gave prosecutors something they hadn't had before: proof that a confession had been engineered, not given. Mayor Grace Pemberton called a press conference the following week, calling the arrest an isolated lapse in judgment. When a reporter from the county's small weekly newspaper asked whether her office had received prior complaints about Rourke, she said she couldn't recall the details. Federal investigators later found 7 letters addressed to her office over 4 years, each logged as received, assigned no response, and never forwarded for outside review. The record suggested avoidance rather than simple oversight. She had not invented the corruption, but her office had repeatedly chosen not to examine what the letters described. 3 weeks into the investigation, Rourke requested a recorded voluntary interview with Vivian. His counsel was present, and Vivian attended as a witness rather than as the lead investigator. He sat across from her in a borrowed conference room, no longer wearing a badge, and asked the question that had clearly been sitting in him since the diner. "Why didn't you just tell me who you were?" Vivian considered the question honestly before answering. "Because if I had, you would have changed instantly," she said. "You would have been polite, released me, and gone back to running this county exactly the way you always have. I needed to see how you treat someone who can't make you afraid. That's the only version of you that matters to the people who don't have a badge." Rourke was quiet for a long moment. "I judged you before you said a word," he admitted. "I know," Vivian said. "That's not new information to me. It's new information to you." She didn't offer him forgiveness, and she didn't need to. Understanding what he'd done wasn't the same as being accountable for it, and the second part was still ahead of him. Over the following months, the case moved the way real cases move, slowly, through grand juries, evidentiary hearings, and negotiated pleas rather than dramatic courtroom reveals. Rourke faced federal civil rights charges tied to the diner arrest, along with state charges for evidence tampering, theft of seized property, and coercion in Malik Denny's case. He was suspended through the county's formal process, later removed from office after separate proceedings, and ultimately accepted a plea agreement rather than risk trial on the full indictment. Mayor Pemberton did not face criminal charges, but resigned under pressure once the ignored complaint letters became public record, and the county commission opened a separate financial review of her office's handling of citizen complaints more broadly. Ellis Boone was not promoted and was not treated as a hero. He was required to testify in 3 separate proceedings, received a formal finding for failing to intervene during the original arrest, and served the following year under a court-appointed outside supervisor before the county would even consider him for any leadership role. He told Calderon once that the hardest part wasn't testifying against Rourke. It was admitting, out loud, that he'd known something was wrong for years and told himself it wasn't his place to say so. Malik Denny's case was formally reopened, and his old confession was thrown out. The dismissal was entered into the public record. The false confession was removed from county databases, and correction notices were sent to the background check systems that had carried the arrest forward. The county also issued a public acknowledgement of wrongful detention and a settlement that could not restore 4 lost years, but finally corrected his name in the record. Diane, the diner waitress, gave a statement describing the arrest in detail, and later admitted to investigators that she'd overheard Rourke pressure 2 other travelers in the same booth over the years. Incidents she'd never reported because she was afraid of losing her job in a town with only one real employer worth having. The older woman who had filmed the arrest turned her phone footage over voluntarily and later said, in a community meeting, that she wished she'd recorded more over the years instead of just watching. Not everyone came forward easily. Some residents still avoided the subject entirely, uncomfortable with what their silence had allowed. The town didn't heal all at once, and federal shadow investigators didn't pretend that it had. Larkspur County adopted a new evidence custody system months later, requiring body cam footage to upload automatically and preventing any single officer, including the sheriff, from deleting or reclassifying it. An independent complaint portal was created outside the sheriff's department, routed to a regional oversight office with automatic federal referral whenever a complaint contained civil rights indicators. Seized property now required digital tracking with 2 independent signatures before disposal, and a retired judge from a neighboring county was appointed to conduct quarterly audits of detentions that never resulted in formal charges. 6 months after the arrest, Vivian returned to Calder Bend one final time before closing the file. She sat in the same booth by the window. Diane, still working mornings, brought her coffee without being asked, and for a moment neither of them said anything about what had happened there. "I should have said something a long time before that morning," Diane finally told her. "You're saying it now," Vivian said. "That matters more than people think it does." Outside, a patrol car passed, driven by an interim sheriff still under outside review, and for the first time, nobody in the diner went quiet when it did. Vivian finished her coffee, left a tip, and walked back out to a rented car with plates from yet another state. There was another town on her list, another set of letters that didn't quite agree with each other, another quiet morning waiting somewhere down the road. The work wasn't finished. It rarely was, but it moved forward one diner, one ledger, one recovered file at a time, in places most people would never think to look. This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes.